Okay, good afternoon. This is our last session on the fourth day. On the first morning when we started, we were talking about some of the criteria I mentioned some criteria I think are essential for looking at social science in a transdisciplinary way. I mentioned that somehow we have to be able to include the individual in our understanding of society and not just focus on the action of collective and statistics and norms and averages, because unlike the behavior of subatomic particles, the individual human being can have a radical impact on the whole reality of the collective. I gave the example of a Steve Jobs or FDR or J.P. Morgan to illustrate this power of the individual. So somehow we have to understand what's the relationship between the individual and the society. And Winston, in his last presentation, said that Laswell, as a legal theorist, was able to trace back the exercise of power to personality characteristics of individuals. This is a very interesting line which I hope we can explore later, because it says that how power is exercised in the society is a function of this nebulous, intangible thing we call human personality, which we can't see or measure as we do our statistics. The second point that we've been discussing is that our transdisciplinary science would have to be able to marry the objective reality, which is the way we tend to look at society, with the subjective reality, whether it's the individual or the collective subjective. And I think many of the examples we discussed, like how FDR stopped the banking crisis in the US very largely by an appeal to a subjective understanding of the American population. Or in the case of J.P. Morgan in 1907, his real act was to instill trust. He didn't have any power he didn't have any official power or administrative power over the society, but he was a center of trust. And he was able to act subjectively, individually, to restore confidence in the financial markets. And then we heard from Roberto now 3 times, the last this morning, about his theme that in looking to the future of social science, we have to recognize the great importance and significance of the future, of not just the forces that have been generated from the past, but of the aspirations for the future and the impact they have on behavior, both individually and collectively. So we've also talked about social power as a theme that's been coming back in all the presentations, and I'd like to come back to it. We've talked about social organization. What exactly is the relationship between social power and social organization? We've been using them together, but we haven't quite pinned it down. Zbig talked to us about networks, which to me are quite effective types of social organization, one type of social organization or one category of social organization that seems to enhance the power. Alberto, in his presentations, has been stressing the subjective aspect. The fact that essentially society is about relationships. Those relationships may be informal or formal, and in the case of a network, we tend to exploit and develop multiple linkages, maximize the number of linkages between people to create a more effective type of social organization. Winston's talked to us about decision-making, and a number of our speakers have been emphasizing that somehow values is central to every topic we have been discussing. without exactly pinning it down. And at the micro level, we've got this thing we call human capital, which is not just an objective reality of how many people with what skills and what knowledge, but subjectively, what are their attitudes, perceptions, skills, emotions, aspirations, and how is their energy expressed in society. So is there any way that all of these elements, each which is obviously important in itself, but is there any way in which they can relate to each other? And what I'd like to do is present what I think is a fairly simple way of thinking about how human beings accomplish as a process. We started out on the first day by saying that human accomplishment applies to all fields of social science and all fields of reality, whether we want to achieve governance, whether we want to create wealth, whether we want to raise harmonious families, whether we want to wage war. Whatever are the values or goals we're pursuing, human beings seek to consciously accomplish. And so is there any process of accomplishment or any process that's common to all these fields? Is there any process that could be common to what how individuals accomplish, how organizations accomplish, and how society as a whole accomplishes? And that's what I'd like to explore this afternoon. This was a slide I put up on Monday morning to kind of set a some challenging things to think about, which I'd now like to come back to. I said that human accomplishment is the result of the interaction between individuals, organizations, society, a physical environment, and the particular life circumstances in space and time. And one of the examples I gave for that was tracing the achievements of Steve Jobs from the garage in Silicon Valley in 1976 up till Apple became the most valuable corporation in the history of the world a few years ago, and looking at the interaction between the personality and actions of an individual, not just one, of course, but he was central to it. The organizations, several organizations, whether it was Apple or Next or Pixar that he created in order to do this. The society in which he was functioning, he was a product of the baby boom generation, the hippie generation. He shared the anxieties that our generation shared about machines taking over the world. He remembered the predictions of George Orwell about the totalitarian 1984 and had this almost religious aspiration to prove Orwell wrong, and so he launched the Mac in 1984 at the Super Bowl to indicate this. And there was the physical environment. Supposing Jobs had grown up in Mississippi instead of Silicon Valley, the environment where right next to Stanford, right next to Xerox Park, where kids were experimenting and playing with technology, electronics, because it was the atmosphere at the time. All these factors came into play. We also have discussed that looking for parallels or relationships between how the individual achieves and the organization develops. And I want to come back and talk about that today. And we've also been looking for commonalities between how we accomplish physically, whether it's to build a building or sail the oceans, commercially, socially, politically, artistically, intellectually, psychologically, culturally, and spiritually. And this last one was really more the subject matter of our last week's course, but Alberto talked to a number of these things, and I'd like to come back to that too. And if you raise any questions on that at the end, that would be great. So I'd like to start with a premise. We've been talking a lot about social power, and I think none of us have any trouble agreeing that as we physically accomplish physical things through a physical power. If I want to move this bottle, there must be an application of energy to set it in motion. Our accomplishments as human beings must be the result of an energy. It's obviously not the same physical energy that's moving the bottle. I would call it a psychological energy. We can call it our motivation, our desires, our aspirations, whatever those fears, whatever it is. But human beings act because when they release an energy to achieve a goal, whether it's to run away from an enemy or to attack an enemy or for love and romance or whatever else it may be. This energy, Janani in her presentations illustrated that this energy tends to be released, especially during times of challenge. When Hitler starts bombing London, it brings a Churchill to the fore, who plays a tremendous role in releasing the energy and directing the energy of a nation and inspiring the energy of a nation to resist. It comes in times of economic crisis. It comes also in response to opportunities. When a new technology comes, when suddenly there's a World Wide Web there, a young man named Steve Bezos says, hey, now that there's a World Wide Web, maybe I could become the biggest bookseller in the world. Maybe I don't have to worry about Barnes & Noble, even though they have 1,000 bookstores all over the country. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to do something that's never been done before. I don't know whether he had that thought before he started, but somewhere along the way, obviously, the opportunity released an enormous energy, not just for him, but for his business. In fact, every human interaction is a potential source of energy. Ivo put up a chart this morning, and nobody commented on it, but you remember he showed that the growth of population from about 1000 AD, and especially after 1800 when it shot up, and he showed a parallel curve for the growth of real per capita GDP that almost followed it exactly. Well, if you don't go in and analyze this too much, you might come to the conclusion the more people there are, the more everybody gets. Which is kind of opposite to our standard. The more people there are, the less there is to divide. But the data, at least, supports the view, the greater the population, the greater the per capita income. Well, let's not go into the validity of it, but one of the things that we see happening is that the greater population is creating a much greater density of human interactions than we've ever had before. It's not just population that's doing that, it's transportation and communication and education and many factors. But if wealth is, traditionally we thought of wealth as something that comes from the ground. And then during the Industrial Revolution, wealth is something that's created in the factory. But in the service economy, wealth is really created by human interactions. It is the value we offer to each other in education or health care or entertainment or tourism. So this human interaction, I think we all know, it can be a very energizing experience. And it's hard for us to stay energized when we're out in the wilderness all alone for 72 hours with nobody to talk to, because the human interaction is a stimulus. There are individuals who can be energized by that, but typically it's the human interaction that energizes us. Well, if you do a study, and I have done a study not only of business people quite extensively, but political leaders and other great creative artists and everything, one of the most striking things you see is, and you can just randomly pick up biographies of great people, and if you read, the chances are very great, whether it's a Churchill or a Mao or a Gandhi or whoever it is, one of the most striking characteristics when you meet a really high-achieving person is the tremendous energy that they generate, that they radiate. And I have lots of examples, but I just chose two here because this is one of my favorites. This was a description of Teddy Roosevelt by an Englishman. He said, "Do you know the two most wonderful things I have seen in your country? Niagara Falls and the President of the United States. Both great wonders of nature." That was how people felt when they met Teddy. He just exuded energy. And there was another quote by someone else: "A perpetual flow of torrential energy, a sense of motion, even in stillness, thrilling to be near." I once met Garry, who may not have been one of the greats, but I think everybody who knew Indira and related to her when she was Prime Minister really felt this is a lady, this is a strong lady. She really exuded energy. Nobody sits around her, not just out of politeness, because there's a charge there. Kissinger, when he met Mao the first time, he said the whole room was full of energy. It's those who experience often that same experience. That's how the describe. Apart from, leave alone, and Boston, if you biography, one of the repeated this energy. But it's also true in the falls. In a period of 2 years, wrote 50 short novels, stories. This was how he did to have a tenfold intensity. The picture on the walls trembled. When he spoke, the word cascading forth. There was no different day and night. As he sat round the clock and blunted at the lens in the process. Descriptions of citizens, and if you read Jobs' biography, he's in a few so Giannani, in one of her presentations, you saw the clip from the Garden Top. Schwarzenegger walks into the classroom trying to pretend he's a kindergarten teacher, and the kids just are in chaos, and they're just running all over the place, and he's not able to handle them. It's full of energy, but energy that's not producing anything. Energy that's just in us. Clearly, itself is not enough to achieve to be power, but it's material from which power comes. It's not just individuals who have energy. 20 years ago, I did a study of some of the top companies. We went into Apple at the time when it was just taking off, when it was just at the top of its early curve before Steve Jobs was thrown out. We went into Intel. We asked the chief financial officer of Intel, what is it that's so different about this company? And the very first words out of his mouth are, it's the energy here. It's the intensity that makes us different. Not our technology, not our brilliant people, not the way we're managed. It's the intensity, the human intensity we've created. And these are all companies I've been into and talked to, and each of them had a very different personality. Some of them much like Coke was very aristocratic. Delta was very informal, almost family-like. Northwestern Mutual was very impressive. It was known as the Quiet Company. It's called the Quiet Company. #1 performer in the life insurance industry in the U.S. Not in size, but in terms of returns and quality by all insurance measures. And though the place is very quiet, they're so alert, they're so dynamic, they're so responsive. There's nothing sleepy about this company. They're just quiet in the way they do it. So it may express in many different ways. And then, of course, it's true of countries as well. And it changes in countries over time. When Alexis de Tocqueville first landed in America in the 1830s to inspect the prison system, he writes he was blown away because he could feel freedom in the atmosphere. He could feel an exhilaration in the atmosphere. Jules Verne's in Around the World in 80 Days happens to be another Frenchman. When he characterized Phileas Fogg's trip across the United States, it seemed to be a crazy place. These people do impossible things. But the one characterization he had all the way is of how high the energy level was. And as you know, de Gaulle was never a fan of America, or probably any other place than France. But when he came to New York for the first time, he wrote back saying the place is charged with energy. When I went to India for the first time in '71, and I'm sure when Ian and Etna went to Bangladesh the first time in 69 or 70, these were very, very quiet, sleepy places. You go there today and you can feel the energy. Harlan Cleveland, our former president of the Academy, who was Assistant Secretary of State under Kennedy and Ambassador to NATO, he was working on U.S. aid programs in the Far East, in Taiwan and Korea in the early 1980s. He coined it later into the quotation, a revolutionizing expectation, what he saw awakening aspirations and the social energy. And that raises a very profound perception, because we all don't have high energy all the time. People, places, organizations, countries, and economic depression is a time when the market is depressed, but people is somewhat depressed also. And that is also a time when our aspirations are high, we're dynamic, we're more courageous. So what we measure reflects something of social psychology of time. Where does it come from? A constant theme that's back in our talking about the important future. Perceive opportunity in the future. The more it seems positive to us, the higher our, the greater our energy, the greater the energy that's released. In times of threat, when we really perceive a great threat, and of course one of the ways that humanity is handling it must have been a connection. The wireless must have gone down. There's been some weakness in the connection. So it may come back. Let's see. Was I saying? One of the challenges of getting the world to respond to climate change is because as long as we can deny the threat and not perceive it as a threat, then we don't have to be compelled to act and energized to act about it. And that's why the public communication is so important. So energy, my basic theme is, doesn't matter whether we're talking about romance or wealth creation or fighting a war or writing books or painting the Mona Lisa, energy is fundamental to all fields of human accomplishment. But energy is not enough. And the kids, everybody seeing your kids playing, know that the play is somewhat purposeless. It may be doing something psychologically and physiologically, but it's not doing something we call accomplishment in the normal sense. It's purposeless. It's not directed. So in order for energy to become social power, and that's my theme, it needs to acquire a direction. And the same thing is true in physics. Energy, we have the energy of the sun, but if you want to convert that energy of the sun into solar power, you have to concentrate it, direct it in a given direction. And in physics, we say when you direct energy, when you give it a direction, it becomes a force. That's the definition. I'm applying a force on this bottle by taking energy and pushing in a particular direction. I've used the analogy, come back. I've used the analogy of the hydroelectric power plant because if you take the energy of a river, that energy may have been flowing for thousands of years and not producing much of anything, except occasionally when a boat gets on it and goes downstream. But if you want to tap that energy, the technology we know very well, the first thing we do is we build a dam, and you channel that raw energy through sluice gates, channel it through and focus it through a turbine, so you can convert that raw energy, you give it a direction, and then you convert it from a force into power. So how do we give direction to our energy? Well, we've been talking about it all week. Everybody's been talking about it in one way or another. We do it through our values, through what it is, through our aspirations. We do it through our understanding. That's why what Alberto was saying about our social construction, our perception, is so important, because somebody sees opportunity. Janani, in her discussion yesterday, when she was talking about opportunities and challenges, she asked a very provocative question. She said, what's the difference between an opportunity and a challenge? Because so often a challenge becomes converted into an opportunity. It can't be fundamentally opposite from one another. It's clearly we perceive as a threat, and in the process of that threat, it becomes opportunity. Steve Jobs said in his commencement he delivered at Stanford years ago, he said the most important best thing happened to him was when he created. He felt like running away from something. He made him that he needed, and 14 years later, they invited all, and he says it's that apparent converted into a positive strength for him. People who have accomplished at a high level, doesn't matter. Michael Blumen, chairman at Sperry uses computer, and the potential executive is make it in Shanghai. When he was a youngster, they had escaped from Germany. Jewish family had escaped from China, and the Japanese came in, and he was thrown in camp. He had to literally 5 years in a Japanese kind of like in Spielberg's Empire of the Sun, that story of the English kid. He said all the skills and capacities and life knowledge and wisdom that he used to rise to Secretary of the Treasury was what he got from this ordeal in the concentration camp. Anyway, whether it's through goals or aspirations or high values, the dedication of a Mahatma Gandhi, or I was telling about Abraham Lincoln, whatever it is, it's that direction that channels the energy, that gives it and makes it a force. But we also know that's not enough. There are a lot of people who have high energy, who are determined and directed but don't accomplish. Some of you saw the the movie clip that Giannini showed from Gladiator, when the last great conquest of, I think it was Marcus Aurelius, against the last of the German tribes who were holding out. The German tribes had plenty of energy. They had plenty of motivation, and their direction was very clear. We want to drive the Romans into the ground. But what they clearly lacked was the sophisticated organization that the Roman army had. In the movie, in 5 minutes, it just brings out the whole thing. The division, the specialization of different, the hierarchy, the specialization, the coordination, the communication systems, everything. This faultless strategy that just killed people who may have been much braver than they were, and certainly were courageous, very courageous. So we need something else for that. It's organization that translates human energy into social power, whether it's power for production, or power for creation, or power for research, or power for transportation, or whatever it is. And here's where networking, and what this big presentation on networking shows, there are all levels of human organization. There are formal and informal. We could, if we had the sophisticated tools, we could rate the effectiveness of our social organization. Working in developing countries, which many of us have, we know the social organization, how effective it is, the government or administrative organization, how effective it is, how much bureaucracy and red tape you have, how much of the energy that goes into the system gets tied up and swallowed and actually cancels out initiative and works counterproductive to the processes. Well, you don't have to go to developing countries. You can watch the U.S. Congress if you want to see how that works. But organization at all levels, whether it's the organization of my individual life or the organization of a company, which is what I do. I go into companies and look at how they use their energy and see how much of that energy is wasted or is working at cross purposes or simply not utilized or is in conflict, either duplication or outright conflict, sometimes competition. Instead of being channeled and or uncoordinated, so the left hand and right hand literally don't know what the other one's doing, and the results are limited. The effectiveness of this thing, and again, John's presentation talked about the constituent organization, truly a disciplinary set to do it through of organization and the personality of our energy. When we talk about it, this is a who's really got he knows what he wants. This is an opportunity. Every minute he knows or she wants versus a and it's a psychological, you can't see it. About the natural side, you ask, well, that is the smallest human matter. Like, so the finite of mass particles. If you talk, still say the of so human being social science about human the unit as act of accomplishment. It may be the act to model, or it may be the act of a meal, starting a money or whatever it is. And we can break down our work. We know that acts themselves are a microcosm. Like the atom can be subatomic particles, many other things. We know our acts are composed of the ideas, the intentions, the feelings, the attitudes, the sentiments, the information we have, the skills we have, all of this coming together, expressing in a coordinated way for a particular act. And we link acts together. We link acts into chains, which we call an activity. I'm cooking. It's a series of acts. We link it into systems where we build in a knowledge or a repetitive or a feedback structures into it. We link these acts and activities and systems into functions. You're a manager. You're in charge of the night shift and managing all of these functions. And we build organizations at the level of a family or a department or a company or a government or whatever it may be. Every social organization is built up from different levels of these acts, whether it's on the internet or it's at home. I like to think of organization like the turbines in a hydroelectric power plant that take the energy that's now been directed as a force and transform it into a usable power, because we don't need a high energy beam of water. We need a high energy beam of water directed on a turbine in such a way to convert it into electricity so we can send it 500 miles to the city to run an engine or light the factories or produce something. And that's what organization does. It takes our human energy, it directs it through plans, procedures, authority. It channels it through systems, through specialization, through functions, and it coordinates it so that the human energy can be applied, mental energy, psychological energy of the enthusiastic sales staff, the physical energy of the people who physically are doing work, in order to produce a result. We are transforming the raw energy into power. What type of power? It may be economic power. It may be the power of a very popular singer who creates popularity by it, or an athlete who achieves great physical feats. It may be the power of legal acumen of a judge or a lawyer. It can be the power, the creative power of a Leonardo or a Balzac or in any field of art. It can be the power of a scientist, an Einstein, or a great genius, a Socrates, whatever it is. But we're all doing the same thing fundamentally. We're releasing our energy, directing it, channeling it, and expressing it in a concentrated way for a particular purpose. It's either the organization of my personality doing it individually, or it's the organization of a company that takes the energy of 5,000 people and does it, or in any organization for that matter, or the organization of the society, which is doing it all the time, providing systems and institutions to help us use our energy more effectively. Back in 1927, Willard called it that, and his wife Annie from Utah, they're more to Washington, opened a fast food restaurant, investing their $1,000 in savings. And after a year, Annie was doing the servers, and I think Bill was doing the cooking, and between the place, and it was successful. And after successful, they opened up a restaurant a mile. By 32 fast food restaurants, you see, and he's growing and expand. Of course, one of the custom table will have all the food they're giving is the sick. A workers, and supervisor if he were there, that he could buy for his set, drive it, and Bill, who is quick ahead. And six restaurants each other. What are they do? Then by the you're going to buy. You're going to come back here for the. I've seen over and over again. Then you're thinking about the maximum and do, and if you try to stretch beyond this, end up closing everything and losing everything. Well, fortunately for the narration, it was the sense he didn't the lawyer. When the 6th, sure enough, he opened the 20th restaurant, not just in Washington, but all the way up and down the east coast of the United States. And how did he do that? He did it by building an organization. And he did that by saying that everything I'm doing now, I have to be able to get somebody else to do. I have to be able to teach somebody to do it. I have to design a system to be sure that they're doing it. And so what he did was he spent his time recruiting new managers, going and negotiating with the bank for new loans, going and negotiating with suppliers for better deals on the raw materials, on the food, and also looking for new locations to open a new one. By 1937, the first commercial airline flights were moving out of Washington, D.C., and they had some pilots and crew members coming by his hot shop to buy coffee and sandwiches on the flight. And so Bill said, "Why are you coming here? If you want coffee and sandwiches, I'll bring them to the plane." And he started what became the first of the first airline catering business in the United States. And of course, airline catering, he couldn't do it just in Washington. He had to do it in Boston, where the flight was landing, and in Newark, and in Atlanta, and other places. And he was expanding into a whole new business. Not exactly a whole new business, but really a different business. And so he needed somebody to be the executive for his entire fast food chain, and another buddy who was going to be in charge of his airline catering business. Then after the Second World War, when his son was growing up, they said, I think the real future is in hotels. And they launched the first of their hotels, a completely new business. And when we went into Marriott, it was in '84, they were opening that year the first of what became known as their courtyard hotels. And their plan was to open 300 hotels across the United States in 1 year. Now the problem was, everybody considered that there's only one man with the genius enough to pick the right location for a new hotel. So that was Bill Marriott. So, Bill, you've got to come to Denver, you've got to go to Tucson, and you've got to go to Santa Barbara and see where the location should be. He said it's absolute nonsense. Any fool can choose a good location if they know what to look for. And he wrote it down, and he taught them how to do it. And he had a whole department doing that. What I'm trying to illustrate is that organization is not just some abstraction out there. Organization, the organization he built, the Marriott Corporation, which is now what, I don't know if I wrote it somewhere, it's about $15 billion or more. The organization became an objectification of his personality, an objectification of his knowledge, his values, because he was really intent on values of customer service, of treating the employees right, the organization of the skills he had about how organization worked systematically of the first of following law. So if you think of organization not as something totally inhuman or different from us, the organization grows with projection. That's why I'm very interested in comes back talk about micro law, how we consider law. We have this huge structure of governance, but where you actually see that process, new law being created, decisions that people make by the actions they take, on their aspirations, they understand this is not abstraction related. There is a social basis, and in this a logical basis to what as a social. But it's easy to see. It's so easy to see how it got created, based on what are the values in shrine base. A very different type of book. I'm not going to go to it, but it's a story. It's the history of Genghis. His father was the leader of a small Mongolia, maybe 1,000 people, 100 families. His father died, and 4 kids and a mother, and the next guard threw them out of the family because he didn't grow up and contend and claim the right to leadership, the right to be the next Khan. Well, throwing people out of a time was just akin to way that a group of 4 people live on their own. Any group of 3 wandering warriors could come and take everything you have, take your animals, kill you, drag away the women. There was no way to survive, so he was sure he was condemning them to death. Somehow they hid for years in the mountains, and then when Genghis and his brothers grew up, they went and found some other families hiding in the mountains, hiding from the tribes, and he created a new tribe out of those, and first brought it up to 30 warriors, and then 300 warriors, and then they conquered their first tribe, and pretty soon he had 3,000 warriors. His father only had 300 when he was the Khan, and he grew that up until the time where he had a few 100,000 warriors, and he had built a military organization that conquered everything from China, throughout China, all the way to the borders of India and down into Europe. He built an organization, a very different type of organization. But if you look at the process, if you look at how the energy they had, the values they had, the direction they had, and the organization, a very effective organization to do what they wanted to do, not what hopefully we want to do with our lives or people want to do today. But he had an organization capable of accomplishing that. So what does organization do? It multiplies the interactions, the interchange, and the networking between people to make it more effective. Language is a basic human organization. It's an organization, it's an arrangement. When I use the word sand, you know what I mean. When I say yes, hopefully you, or no, we know what it means. It's an organization of sounds with shared meaning that enables us to network with each other. And if we didn't have language, we'd be very ineffective in networking and building our capacities. What is market? Market is a place where people who want something and people who have something to give come and exchange there. Otherwise, you have to go door to door, village to village to find somebody who wants what you have or somebody who will exchange with you. The market is a way to improve that networking. Money, of course, is a tremendous networking tool because instead of having barter where we have to exchange with somebody who has what we want, we can exchange for money and exchange with anybody and then convert that again back into some other goods and services. So money facilitates great networking. Thanks for coming and being with us this week. I know you have to catch your bus, so safe travels. We understand networks and networking better now since the internet came because we can really see and conceptualize these things. Actually, it's the higher organizing, coordinating, creating links, opportunities that are there in society, which we can't have. So, organization a tremendous power. It's into social power. It manages because when I web and I see a product, I can order it and download it. I can see the book immediately. It energizes me. I become more enthusiastic about what I do. It creates positive feedback loops for 3 weeks or 3 months to get something, to get the that I want. It helps us tap opportunities. As the nation evolves, we're able to tap social opportunities, able to tap before it to help us exploit social potential. Didn't realize was there. There were literally, Google is an example of that. Search engine in '98, my God, another search engine. We've already got 30 of them, and one of the big problems is to figure out which one on earth would we want another one. People gave better searches, they information of what we were looking for. And then they had to do something that looks so simple. We wonder why Excite or one of the other early ones Yahoo didn't think of it. They said, look, we know what people are looking for. Why don't we match it with what advertisers are trying to sell? They simply created a link between search and ad, which didn't exist before then, and that's their whole revenue model. And they're the biggest advertiser in the world, and because they saw this link. It's not that the link was a non-existent. It was an untapped social potential. So organization, network, whatever you call it, helps us to tap those opportunities. Today, if you happen to be a collector of rare cameras or rare beer signs, I've heard, in North America, you put that beer sign up on eBay and you'll find, sure enough, there's somebody in the world as crazy as you are who also collects beer signs and doesn't have this one. And he's willing to pay for it. It makes this linkage possible. That's what organization does. But organization does something else. It helps us develop as people. Because we can't all learn to do everything. It can give us a capacity to specialize in what we really do well. And going back to Apple when it was just two people, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, Jobs was not an engineer. He was not technically competent. Wozniak was almost a genius, a technical genius. He's the first one who connected a typewriter, a keyboard to a TV monitor and typed the sentence and had it come out there. He was the first one. He was the one who developed the microprocessor and the language, the programming language for the Apple II, the Apple I, II, that really made Apple the success. But Steve Jobs, Wozniak didn't even want to be in business. He was going to give this stuff away. He was a hobbyist. It was Jobs that said, no, we're going to create a company, we're going to make money, and he was a marketing genius. And he knew how to package things, he knew how to sell them, he knew how to hype them. It was the combination of these two. So organization enables us each to specialize in what we can do well or develop specialized capabilities, which means it helps us to more fully utilize our human potential, our human capital potential. There's one more step in this link of this process, and that's skills. What are skills? You see a small child, put him on a bike for the first time, or give him a pen or a pencil and ask him to write, and you see the hand can't give the motion properly. It draws in some big way. It can't draw a circle, which I can't either probably, but if he tries the bike, he's shaking all over. What is a skill? A skill is we acquire a mastery over the energy, our physical energies, so that we can direct them and control them and apply them in a particular way and I can put the dot or where it should sign my name exactly on the line. To control the energy at the level of the individual. And we have types of skills, physical skills, relational skills, which I think we all know are among the most difficult. How do you organize work? How do you motivate others? How do you judge other people? Psychological skills, social skills for inaction. Whether it's the technical need or the problem I was held this morning. Of companies that seem to be to one another. We haven't been able to overcome the contradiction or the compartmental thinking that we got in training. So skills are a way that we channel our energy effectively. And there's a way, and in everything everyone says, we come back to the importance of attitude. We all agree on it, but really thought about is it relational power or social energy or the direct knowledge. I don't know how many of you I know that we're drawn through New York City. Go from north to south, you go to the night or on the weekend, little transit, your speedometer 35 miles. You go down theoretically 30, 40, 50 blocks, intersection, 30 or 40, 50 lights are stopping because the lights are synchronized for that. But if you try to go fast or too slow and you get out of sync with the lights, you may end up stopping 30 or 40 intersections. Or if the traffic is not obeying the rules and the guys coming from the cross intersections are going into the intersection when it's yellow and blocking the way, so you have to slow down, it throws the whole thing off, and instead of having all green lights, you end up with all red lights. And well, that's what our attitudes do. Our attitudes are like the switches, the micro switches that turn on the energy flow or turn it off. If I have a positive attitude towards a person or towards an action or towards an event, my energy gets released. Oh, that's an opportunity. If I've got a negative attitude, for whatever reason it is, the energy doesn't flow. There's no accomplishment there. There's no possibility of accomplishment there. So if skills really relate to more the physical side, our psychological energy is channeled through our attitudes. But it's still the same process. If the attitudes say go, we release our enthusiasm. If the attitudes say no, we say, that's not for me. This is not interesting. I don't trust that person. I don't believe in this. I'm sure there really is no such thing as global warming. It's all a fraud. At the cultural level, we also have attitudes, or call them values. We also have customs and all. Our cultures also tell us that in certain ways we can release our energy positively, and in certain ways we shouldn't. When I went to Intel, they said one of the things they did was train all their new recruits and train their managers how to deal with confrontation. Because they're in an industry where the kids who have just come out of graduate school know more about the technology than the manager who's been there for 5 or 10 years, simply because the technology is changing so quickly and the managers don't have any time to keep up with it. So they train their managers how to listen, how to interact with a young kid who tells you don't know what you're talking about. And without losing your cool, without losing your authority, in a way that you can constructively get the knowledge that he may really have without freezing the whole organization. Well, our culture does that. It tells us it gives us certain behaviors to work effectively with each other, and of course, according to the society, it also prohibits many behaviors and says, no, women, you belong in the kitchen, girls shouldn't go to school, or whatever, or your skin is particular color or religion, whatever it is. But it's doing the same thing that we do in an organization or we do in ourselves. It's doing it at the level of the culture. It's in a more subtle frame. So, we've got human energy. We've got operations, goals, direct organization, our personal organizationally, and the organization of our businesses, NGOs, society, and culture that channel that energy and explain through the skills and attitudes. Imagine you have a 1,000 power plant 6 miles from here, and it's bringing this huge amount of energy to the city and get some light in the projector or whatever it is. Ultimately, the tiny little filament in the bulb, incandescent bulb anyway, or the tiny little in the chip, as to whether we are able to add energy and convert it into results. That was so the skills and attitudes would be in each moment, in each expression. You lack a skill or you lack the attitude, energy may go to waste, but have. So this is a way of conceptual, just a energy is given, it becomes a force, it flows through social organization, it becomes power, and it's channeled through skills and attitudes to get results. I've spoken for enough time. I was going to give you the example of George Washington during the American Revolution to show how the personality of an individual, the values he had, the knowledge he had, the motivations he had, how he was able to make an imprint on the American Revolution and the values of the American society, why he got selected as President of the United States. Just I'll give one illustration, when he was the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and his militias were starving because there was no food. They were in the middle of the winter in Valley Forge. They didn't have shoes, but there was snow everywhere. They didn't have blankets. Half of them were walking around in half garments. And the Congress was paralyzed and said, there's nothing we can do. We can't give you money. We can't give you clothes. Sometimes they didn't even have bullets for the guns, or they didn't even have guns. And he managed to keep this army together, and sometimes the militias went out and raided nearby farms and everything, and he absolutely refused to allow the militia to take the private property of the citizens, even when some of them were selling and profiteering by selling to the English. The result was he had a value that the military must be under the command of the Congress, of the legislature. It was a personal value of his. People thought he was crazy to insist on this value. Your army's at stake. And it developed and he followed it over years. Once the war was over and the British were gone, the single greatest concern of the states was, we don't want to create an army and we don't want to create a federal government that's going to tyrannize us like King George III did. The single greatest concern was, we shouldn't create a new tyranny. And they finally decided there's only one man that we can trust with the job, who's a man who's already proven that no matter how much power he has, he refuses to use that power, he refuses to exercise that power without the constitutional authority. And that became the basis for not just what's written in the Constitution, but that became the basis for constitutional power in the U.S., that the military doesn't assert itself against the authority. And I'll just end with a side. When King George asked after the war, he asked, what is Washington going to do after the war? He was told that Washington's plan to his farm and become a farmer was true. George said that he was the greatest man in the world. His greatness was not winning wars and win that many battles. He's not a great military leader in terms of energy. He managed to keep the army together and instill a values in that. And this really was his greatness, that he valued something that had tremendous self. I hope that I'm able to connect. I've been trying to a lot of different and put them together. Not say that this is a complete concept, but I think that this promise alone ties together with all contributions hearing from convinced me that the basis for looking at society in a trans-disciplinary way and under process that are common to our political, social, and other fields of life. And I'm very encouraged. I've heard so far others that work on this, that we come up with something substantial. Comments, questions?
Yeah, very interesting. I think the way you highlight is the energy, and the outcomes of all the examples are very positive. I think today there is extraordinary commitment, extraordinary strong values, extraordinary social capital, real understanding to achieve its Islamic State.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then is, what are the mechanisms by which we get the best out of that and not the worst? Another example is the Marriott example. Who knows, maybe it would have been the right answer to say you can have no more than 7, because somebody else might have done that, and somebody else might have done that, then you might have ended up with many more people being employed than moving into a consolidated...
You mean the right answer for the society?
The invisible, it's where do we get the invisible hand from to direct this and channel positive energy into positive outcomes, and not channel them, which is what is happening today, well, in retrospect, into less than positive outcomes?
Well, those are great questions. Those are really great questions. Let me try a few of them, if I can remember them all, because I like them all. You're absolutely right. The same process works for the Islamic State. I'm only talking about how human beings achieve their goals, not necessarily the best goals for humanity. This is the process we've been using, and that's why it's part of a process. And that's why I didn't mean to imply that we should all be free to do anything we want and release our energy, because then the mafia would be everywhere and we'd have chaos everywhere, or we'd have Genghis Khan everywhere destroying things. I was trying to show the source of the social power. But the other side of this is the side that Winston was talking to this morning, is how do we direct that power, not just for the benefit, perceived benefit of myself at the moment, but for the perceived benefit of the whole society. And there's where values are so critical. And there's where institutions that do what I'm doing individually, our social institutions have to do to channel the social energy and give that a direction which is sustainable and fulfills the goals of everyone. And absolutely, absolutely. And so you're right, very right to say that, because I was giving examples, at this level. Alberto, there's another side to this, and Alberto made a beautiful presentation on Monday about empowerment and disempowerment according to the social construction of reality that we have. And the social construction of reality that the Islamic State has is that we have to destroy the enemy, which means anyone who's not a Sunni or whatever it may be, and put the women back in the kitchen. And therefore, the results we get from our accomplishment can't be better than the perception of reality we have. In fact, Alberto said, science doesn't study reality, science studies the way we construe reality. And how do we create? His whole presentation was about how do we create individuals who have a more positive, more constructive view of reality and are able to channel their energies more positively. And he talked about, because he's a Rogerian and worked with Carl Rogers, and that's what he's done for 30 years, he talked about the social atmosphere and education that we, in order, that's at the individual level. Social level, what is society? That's the topic that we're grappling with in these moments. What are the values? That's why your initiative at Bristol was, because values are just values. What are values sustainable? What are the socialization to it would really flag the
which is very key to the
power comes because you control the energy, and that's what really organizes. The message that I can't do that, and you. Yes. Sorry?
So dissemination, the information, these are all come there. Media don't have power. That cannot gain.
Organization enables them to convert whatever they believe in, whatever their intentions, whatever their money power, or their money can do, or their influence can do, or their connections can do, or their technological know-how can do. They channel it through, whether it's a technological organization or a social organization, we call a newspaper or the internet or whatever it is.
And on your graph, actually slide which is focused on power plants, there is a control gate. Who is controlling the gate of the energy which becomes power? It's a very big issue.
I think that the model is very useful to clarify the anatomy of energy, organization, and outcomes of issues there. But of course, inside that model is the ubiquity of human choice making and the responsibility of choice making. So that energy still requires some direction and ambition in its connection to organization and outcomes via the self-conscious mechanism of responsibility and choice. That means human beings have to better understand the anatomy of decision-making itself and responsibility for it. The model that Laszlo used, which gives us very the architecture of decision-making itself, generated criticisms. If I'm in the Soviet Union, this is a wonderful model for me to really stream up the decisions that I want to take on Central Committee or something. So that question of choice making and values is an important part of, if you like, the problem of understanding values in terms of social responsibility. Ian's point is correct. You can technically speed up and make more efficient the exercise of power, but then power for what?
Exactly.
You know, that's the...
And so an analysis should be, how are we directing our energy? What is the knowledge that we're using to direct it? What are the values by which we're directing it? What are the organizations, mechanisms through which we're directing it? And what are the decisions at each level? Because this is a very simplified model. As you said, at every level there are decisions. At every level there's knowledge. There are values at every level. I may be in an organization that's supposed to be dedicated to serving humanity, but my value is I'm looking out for prestige or my self-importance or, you know, my place in the organization. So, yeah.
Even would require subsequently some process of appraisal. Otherwise, you know, you have to have that to say, well, that was provisional, not absolute. We've got the reshape.
How to get to the powerful. What is the what? You have new mechanisms, most political choices, political process, and constraint. Or we have an overload in us. I think one of them is how do we really understand what society is? There a vision that can capture? Until you have that, you really can't put a system in. Don't you put economic systems in?
I agree with you. We have actually muted vital important contested domain of the priorities of the values. And even the thing was extensively off with others in other times. Might raise factors of amnesty. All the governments next torture, you know. Then when you this practicing torture in this domain, and that's I think there's a significant intellectual classic side of that to make discourse and try to reshape this history.
Any other comments? Okay, we're done today then.